This is your World War III update. I have some exclusive information to share with you today with respect to the U.S. government's attempts to procure large volumes of nuclear protective medication from, get a load of this, yours truly. Yes, indeed, today we've been contacted by proxy by the U.S. government on their behalf to acquire large volumes, very large volumes, of this nuclear protective medication. Not only myself, but others in the industry that I'm affiliated with have also been contacted for this. Now we're going to talk about what medication it is, why this is mildly disconcerting to say the least that the government is soliciting me, of all people, knowing how critical I am of said government. That smacks of incompetence and the ineptitude in terms of government preparedness. I mean, think about that for a second. Even my trolls out there, you got to admit, isn't that kind of scary that they're coming at guys like me? And trust me, it's not only in this particular industry, whether it's food, guns, body armor, it's all private industry. The government is completely and utterly inept when it comes to emergency preparedness. But of course, we have to try to understand this in the broader, very tumultuous geopolitical context that we find ourselves in. Now, there's a lot of other stories that we have to decrypt because in the last 48 hours, a lot has happened. It was very quiet while Syria was collapsing, and now things are really starting to heat up again. So, of course, we have to talk about the drone incidents and the contradictory reports by the Pentagon and the media and various political and military figures with respect to this issue. We're going to try to triangulate what the F is going on. We also have to talk about statements made by the Russian Foreign Ministry that seem to signify that U.S.-Russian relations are reaching all-time lows. And in fact, this is the exact quote that Maria Zakharova said. She is I believe she is a Russian Foreign Ministry representative. She said that U.S.-Russian relations are on the verge of rupture. On the verge of rupture. Might as well say rapture the way this is going. And there's been numerous travel advisories reiterated in either direction, and it bears repeating that there is still no Russian ambassador in Washington. And you remember what the Russians said? Don't worry, we're going to replace him. And that was months ago. Now, it could be argued that they're just waiting for Trump to get into office till they decide on who they're going to send there. But isn't that concerning that there's no damn ambassador in Washington for Russia? That's something that you would see before a nuclear war. We're going to talk about whether or not these drone incidents have anything to do with that. And no, the Pentagon denies that this is from some Iranian mothership. But we're going to talk about whether or not they are just trying to alleviate panic over the issue. It is expected, according to U.S. intelligence, that the Russians will fire another Irbm intermediate-range ballistic missile into Ukraine in the coming days ahead. They're certainly going to do some major retaliation because today, not only was Chechnya hit by what was presumably a drone, possibly one of Ukraine's new drone/cruise missiles that they've been boasting about, but they also hit the Rostov region with ATACMS missiles, and we know that because there's visual evidence. I believe it's 6 ATACMS were fired on that oblast. This is inside Russia. This is outside of the Kursk region. Okay? So Belgorod, Kursk, Rostov, all of these oblasts have been hit, and they are not in the outside of the Kursk region. So that means that whatever Washington said about how they've limited this to the Kursk region, which of course is still under occupation, some of it by the Ukrainians, and you got to scratch your head and say, how the hell is that possible? That Ukrainians still have a foothold in Kursk and the Russians have yet to be able to advance. There has to be some allowance of this by the Kremlin. Perhaps, as some people have speculated, maybe it's because they want to entrap the Ukrainians and try to encircle them, with some of their best troops, of course, being there. So we have to talk about that. We got to talk about nuclear threats from Belarus, reiterated once again. We have to talk all about the contradictions between Vladimir Putin saying that nukes don't matter just a few days after, because he's saying nukes don't matter because of this new Wonderwaffe missile that has the kinetic energy warheads and can hit with the explosive force of multiple, like, typical bunker busters. But he also said that just a few days after altering the nuclear doctrine. So these things don't add up. So this leads me to believe that this weapon is not nearly as effective as the Russians are playing it up to be. We have to talk about Ukraine potentially going on the counteroffensive, possibly being balkanized and incorporated into NATO, what remains of it. That seems to be what's on the table. We got to talk about Polish civil defense efforts, China blockading Taiwan in their simulation, in the largest military exercise around Taiwan since 1996. Okay? We got to talk about what's going on in Iran. The Ayatollah made some statements today. We got to talk about bird flu. We got to talk about the markets that are at all-time highs in the thick of all of this. Now, going back to the exclusive story today. Again, nothing speaks to the incompetence of government. And how unnerving is it that they're reaching out to a quack like me for this stuff right here? This is called ThyroSafe. This is potassium iodide. It prevents the uptake of radiation into your thyroid gland in such case that there was a nuclear war or a nuclear incident at a power plant. This is a quintessential staple of any preparedness kit when it comes to nuclear preparedness. This, your gas mask, your nuclear war survival skills book, we've done extensive videos on that. The government is looking for 224,601 doses of this stuff, 20 tablet blister packs. Okay, so 220,000 of these, and they want this particular item, they want it from the private small business sector, and they want it by December 21st of 2024. Now, let's talk about what the reasons for this could be. They're saying that this could potentially be used for a potential emergency preparedness or public health related procurement objective. The procurement is for a civilian agency and, of course, is for potassium iodide. Now, a civilian agency could be the government, okay? Washington is right there. These are going to be delivered to Perry Point, Maryland. What is in and around this region? Well, you have Fort Meade military base, and you also have, I believe it's Andrews Air Force Base, and Washington isn't too far from there. So you have a lot of government employees within this region. Now, this could be pertinent to some annual quota, some fulfillment due to the end of the fiscal year coming up, and it could be more focused on nuclear power plants. That's typically, actually in Canada, if you live near a nuclear power plant, you'll have this stuff sent to you for free. I believe you have to contact somebody, but if you live around a nuclear power plant, you might actually qualify to get this stuff for free in case there was some kind of nuclear meltdown or other incident. You would need that in order to prevent getting contaminated and potentially getting acute radiation sickness. Of course, the government has been stockpiling acute radiation sickness medication as well. And I believe that you can get that, just sidebar here, I believe you can get, I think, is it Odanzatran, or it's one of those acute radiation sickness medications. You can get it through Jace Medical as well. You can get this at CanadianPreparedness.com because like hell, I'm selling the government 200,000 doses of this stuff. In fact, I know one of the main distributors of this stuff, and they only have, and they're still considered a small business, technically speaking. I think anything under 500 employees, even they don't have enough to fulfill this. The question is, why is the government trying to soak it up from small businesses? Now, you might say, well, this is a total small business set aside. They're trying to help out small businesses here. Maybe that's the case, or perhaps it's something more sinister. and that they're trying to suck up whatever they can from the civilian market, not the government civilian, but the civilian market, before going directly to this company and saying, hey, we need several million doses of the stuff. This also, of course, calls into question, if we're talking about continuity of government here, right? Remember, if the shit goes down, the government is going to need people to police all the other people. They're going to need people who are alive, not puking their guts out, and whose hair is not falling out, in order to maintain some sort of rule of law and administrate the government services somehow, whatever government services there might be. You're going to need workers above and beyond the military. And so you would want to have this kind of stuff. Now, this is not the first contract of the sort. They did this last year as well. They're slowly accumulating this stuff. There is an expiration date on here. I believe this one says 2032. I would disregard that, to be brutally honest. Now, that's not legal advice, or that's not medical advice, I should say. But the U.S. military has done extensive studies. There's one on here that we cite quite often. I can't remember what it's called. I believe it's called the, the Shelf Life Extension Program study that showed that the potency of many medications lasts well beyond the expiration date. Everything from antibiotics to painkillers to potassium iodide. And because this is a very, simple type of medication, it's just a couple chemicals, I imagine that this is going to last a long time. Okay, it's going to retain its potency. So don't worry so much. Don't get obsessed about expiration dates. Whether it's food or medicine, most expiration dates are really just best before dates. It just means that their potency starts to diminish over time. But this is quite concerning, okay? And this is all public knowledge. Like I said, this is, they got the number there, NDC 50633091020, or equivalent product, consisting of 65 milligram tablets in blister packs. So they distinctly want it for distribution, obviously, to a civilian population, and they want it by December 21st. Now, again, I don't want to scare people with this, because this very well could be for the purpose of like just a customary preparedness for local nuclear power. There's a lot of nuclear power plants on the East Coast, especially within this region. I presume there's a few. So that could be what this is pertaining to. They might have to have a certain amount of these on hand in such case of some kind of emergency. But I would be concerned that this maybe has something to do with global events. We see them downplay these things at every possible turn. I mean, just take a look at the current state of relations with Russia, okay? And just think of everything that I've told you over the last few years and how close we are. This is not just me. This is the most astute, knowledgeable nuclear analysts, nuclear professionals, military, professional academics, politicians who are far more knowledgeable of Russia-American relations than I am. They're all saying that we are closer to nuclear war than at any other time in history, bar none. And when you hear Sabrina Singh from the Pentagon spokesperson, come on today and in a very sort of nonchalant, flippant manner say that these drones are really no big deal, essentially. Don't worry, it's not the Iranians. We don't know what it is, but, we'll look into it if they contact us. That's who's in charge. And if you think for a minute that they're going to tell you that, and I mean, think about it. Everything that I've said on this channel, and the government is so stupid that they still contact me for stuff. I mean, think about the level of incompetence. So, there's no common sense whatsoever. If they knew how much I criticize them, maybe they wouldn't reach out. But that's also a show of desperation, possibly. We just think that, they know everything and they have this all-seeing eye in the sky. What if they're just really that dumb? Okay, I mean, like, the Canadian government is incredibly dumb. Like, it's just, oh my God. Whew, man, if we go into World War III, there's going to be so much pain and suffering because this government can't get it together in the best of times. Just imagine the shit that's going to go down when the lights go out. We have a very limited supply of this stuff. You can get it at CanadianPreparedness.com. We don't have enough of this stuff to give to the government for this particular instance. So, you know, you might as well just get it while you can. There are other alternatives to ThyroSafe. You don't have to get it through us. This is not like an elaborate marketing scheme. This is legit. You can go and find this information online, okay? I was doing a little bit of research with respect to the amount of government employees in that given region. And in Washington, there's 282,000 government employees from all agencies, which somewhat maps on to that figure, but who knows? This is in Chechnya. Major explosion on a government building in Chechnya. This is being attributed to a Ukrainian drone. This, of course, is an embarrassment for Ramzan Kadyrov. Clearly a message to him personally in light of all of the events going on in Syria right now. We could very well see some sectarian violence start to intensify on the Ukrainian front as well. The Ukrainian armed forces used 6 ATACMS missiles to strike the airport in I cannot say this word for the life of me. Taganrog. Ministry of Defense, Ukrainian armed forces used 6 ATACMS missiles to strike an airfield there. So that means that the Russians are absolutely going to retaliate, because if they're using ATACMS, they're using a weapon that not only up until maybe a year and a half ago, the U.S. didn't even want to give. And then when they finally gave it, they said, okay, we're not giving you the long-range variant. They gave them the long-range variant. And then they said, okay, yeah, you can even fire into Russia. And here we are. The Russians are priming the IRBMs. Russia may allegedly use a Rezhnik missile in Ukraine in the coming days. Russia may use its new experimental missile. According to, in the coming days, the Associated Press reported on Wednesday. Now, this was also reported by numerous other prominent bullshit mainstream media agencies that we all continue to refer to as authorities in this particular area. On the other hand, Washington sees Moscow's use of the new missile as an intimidation tactic rather than a game changer in a long-standing conflict with Ukraine. Now, I will say it is somewhat weird that Vladimir Putin would propose a new nuclear doctrine which lowered the threshold for nuclear use. Of course, red lines that have already been crossed many times, and they've yet to respond. And then only a few, I think it was a couple weeks after that, they demonstrate this weapon that they claim is new. Now, the jury is still out on how new it is, because it could be a Frankenstein of ICBM technology. And there's still a debate on, you know, how powerful this weapon is with just the kinetic warheads, with conventional warheads, and even with nuclear warheads. Obviously, with nuclear tactical nukes armed on this thing would be absolutely devastating. But Vladimir Putin is trying to bluff and say that, you know, this can be a replacement for nuclear weapons, which is just absurd on its face. Even Lukashenko has said that we have weapons more powerful than the Rezhnik missile, and they're called nuclear weapons. That's what he said today in a press conference. So even with respect to the Kremlin's team, they can't quite get their answer straight. But essentially what this means, I think, is that Putin is bluffing. Putin is trying to avoid a nuclear war. Putin is saying that Western provocations are not going to work, that the Russians are not going to resort to using a nuclear weapon, which appears to be what the West wants. But the West wants the Russians to use it in Ukraine in an attempt, I think, to rally and finally, once and for all, mobilize the collective West for World War III. Because we are wholly unprepared to fight a major conflict. Never mind fight the conflict, even to police the aftermath, which is really arguably what all of this preparation is for. From the Schengen corridor across Europe, the ability for NATO to move its forces across Europe in an expedient fashion, the military buildup in the Baltic states, in the Baltic Sea, and all of these other initiatives that are currently taking place are arguably just for how to deal with the aftermath, how to police your population, and for continuity of government purposes. But you see the contradiction here. Vladimir Putin is saying that this new nuclear doctrine is meant as a deterrent, and he's also, on the other hand, saying that nuclear weapons are also obsolete. He didn't quite say that, but he essentially said that this Orezhnik performs all the things that a nuclear weapon would do without the radiation. But the problem with that is that if you get into a shooting match with a nuclear-armed state and you're using Orezhniks and they don't have Orezhniks, what is the West going to use against Russia? They're going to use nuclear weapons. So all you're going to do in that scenario is spare your adversary the effects of radioactive fallout. So it doesn't really make sense. And I think that this is Putin's final attempt, maybe penultimate attempt at trying to discourage the West from further provocations, which of course they're not going to. Now, why has there been a slowdown in attacks using Storm Shadow and ATACMS on Russia? It may have something to do with the launchers. Apparently, the fog of war is so thick, you're never going to be able to confirm any of this stuff. But clearly there's a reason. These things are happening way too sequentially. Syria is collapsing and almost nothing is happening in Russia and Ukraine. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? If you wanted to, one of the greatest times would be to do something while that was happening, while everybody was transfixed on what's going on in the Middle East. But nothing was happening, and this probably means that there's high-level coordination between both what's happening on the Ukrainian front and what's happening in Syria. That indeed, this is a world war. And that coordination happening between Turkey, and who of course is a member of NATO, and quite possibly Israel and Ukraine, of which they apparently had a very sizable presence there in terms of advisors on the ground and people who were showing these terrorists. And I'm going to show you a picture of Zelensky next to Jelani in just a moment, and you can let me know if you think these guys are related. I'm getting those Trudeau-Castro vibes, if you know what I mean. But apparently there's a lot of Ukrainian soldiers in the mix. And even the colors that they're using with the blue duct tape and all the stuff on the helmets, it all maps on. So that's really what we have going on in that department. So very confusing state of affairs. Now, before we get into this drone conversation, what time do we got here? Talking for 23 minutes. Oh, we're good. The night is young. The night is young, baby. Moscow has advised Russian citizens to avoid travel to the West, citing risks of harassment and detention. Relations with the U.S. are described as on the verge of rupture. On the verge of rupture. Now, think about the quiet that we've seen in the last couple weeks. Yet, at the same time, we hear constant nuclear rhetoric from Putin, from Lavrov to Lukashenko. What that tells us, we can infer that big plans are being hatched. Russians have intelligence on what the Ukrainians are planning, and they're sending these signals. This is kind of like the East Coast and West Coast rappers. They used to embed code in songs in order to kind of send messages to one another about what's happening in their part of the world, all right? These are they're telegraphing to the other side with these gestures and this brinkmanship, so to try to deter the other side. But I don't think it's going to work. Anytime we've seen, it's like the longer the period of quiet, the greater the flashbulb event when it arrives. And I think we're about to see that in the coming days, as this article indicates. Conversely, the U.S. has also issued a travel advisory of their own. The U.S. is warning against travel to Russia due to risks of harassment, detention, and arbitrary law enforcement by Russian authorities. So things are definitely getting down to the wire. Russia is claiming that they have the capacity to produce, get a load of this, 300 Orezhnik Irbms annually, 25 a month. Now, according to Ukrainian intelligence, at the time of using the first Orezhnik, they only had 2. And I can't stand that smug look on Budanov's face as much as you can, but I gotta say, Ukrainian intelligence has been fairly good for the most part, despite the fact that they like to embellish the details, and it's basically a totalitarian dictatorship masquerading as a democracy. They have good intel on the Russians. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. And vice versa. The Russians have good intel on them. Ukraine is alleging, some sources are saying that they're planning on doing another major offensive into the Belgorod region. We're going to see in the not so distant future, I do imagine. Zelensky is attempting, and this is what I thought was going to be the case all along, and I think the Russians, they might go for this. They might go, because they don't want the western part of Ukraine anyways, they might say, hey, take west of the Dnieper, and so long as there is an armistice, so long as there's a peace agreement signed, NATO, you can incorporate that side of the river into Ukraine. You can have your security guarantees, meaning that if we get in a shooting match, then I guess it's game on. That in itself would likely prohibit Ukraine from escalating in the future. And perhaps this is why the West doesn't want to bring Ukraine into NATO, not because the West would have to defend them, but because that would mean that Ukraine couldn't make a move. Like if Ukraine was in NATO, then the West would have to rein them in, right? Because you wouldn't want to go, because you know what that means. Article 5 means essentially likely nuclear war with Russia. So long as Ukraine is outside of NATO, they can fight this war until all of the young males in Ukraine have been exhausted. And that's essentially what they're looking for right now. So according to Anthony Blinken, they're looking for a commitment of lowering the recruitment age to 18 years old. I believe right now it's like around 25. And I don't know how many young males are still in Ukraine, but they're wanting to exchange that for increased amounts of firepower. All right? That's the approach that they're currently about to take. So this war is really only in its infancy, as crazy as that sounds, because it's very unlikely the Russians are going to go for any sort of proposal by Donald Trump. Donald Trump cannot look weak. And I think now that Trump's elected, Trump's followers are very forgiving. And even if he can't fix this thing in 24 hours, which he clearly won't, even if he can't fix it in 24 months, which he likely won't, his followers will forgive him, and there'll be all kinds of excuses as to why it couldn't happen, and yada, yada, yada. But make no mistake, this conflict is really only in its nascent phase. We are likely to see, this could just be the equivalent of the Spanish Civil War and World War II, not even considered, World War just yet, but everybody's preparing for it. But NATO needs a flashbulb event. NATO needs a guy like Trump or this Pete Hegseth character in order to revitalize the military. I'm not saying this from a place of preference, but look, just take a look at the state of our military. Do you really think we're ready to fight a world war? Everybody in this society, across every domain, needs a very swift and firm kick in the ass. We almost need hard austerity here to teach us, to toughen us up, to make us have thicker skin once again. Some of us remember what it's like to be poor, and we work hard out of our own intrinsic motivation, but there's a lot of soft little bitches out there who are just going to be blown over by the faintest breeze, the faintest nuclear shockwave that hits them when it hits the fan. And it does not look good across the board with respect to that. Should we get into the drone story, or should we touch on some other things? Did I show you guys Zelensky's rainbow missiles? Yes, they are stockpiling missiles. Got the rainbow colors in the back there. They got a bunch of these drone/cruise missiles. I think these are like augmented Neptune missiles, if I'm not mistaken, but they have a 700-kilometer range. There is also talk that we're going to be seeing these as soon as Olaf Scholz is out of office. They're going to be sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Very likely at this point. It's not a huge stretch, okay? Dmitry Kuleba, if you've heard of this guy, he is now in the United States. He's the former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine, and he left the country. He left the country, just like the former commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces is no longer there. All right? Think about that. Think about that for a second. These high-ranking politicians, the highest-ranking politicians, are leaving the country after their tenure. What does that say? This is a new map that has come out. I see these maps all the time. You know, it's funny seeing story after story on the mainstream news reference things like nuke map that's been around for 10 years that we've been talking about on this channel. They act as if it's something new. But this one is a new map that was released, and it shows essentially the average exposure risk to radiation, and another reason why you need this FireSafe stuff, which I just dropped all over the place. This is a new map that shows if the ICBM Minuteman missile silos were hit, which is not the only nuclear target. Okay, there's all kinds of nuclear targets that are going to be less commonly known about, and they typically are going to revolve around critical infrastructure. These are going to be the main targets of a nuclear strike in a nuclear war. The cities thing, the idea of nuking cities really doesn't make any sense, because what you want to do is you want to completely and utterly destroy your adversary's military and their ability to launch any sort of counterattack or diminish it. Of course, they're not going to get the submarines, although there's some technology that could potentially there are attempts, of course, to discover the locations of submarines. Whether they have that information or not is unknown, but we're talking about airfields, even things like data centers. You know, they're going to be building the world's biggest data center in Alberta, and I think that that's going to put a big old target on Alberta's back, because that's going to be something that could potentially be weaponized, because it's going to be like AI, you know, very advanced. It's going to be this massive data center facility. And a lot of these data centers are going to be, you know, data is the new currency. And, you know, AI, especially if it can be weaponized, if we're talking about a Skynet thing, and if we're talking about AGI and the potential for that to be used in a nuclear sense, like, I mean, AGI, I think it was Vladimir Putin who said that, you know, AGI is whoever discovers it first rules the world. Okay, so it really is like a nuclear deterrent in a sense. So there's almost a vested interest in nuking another country if you know that they're going to achieve artificial general intelligence first before you, because if they get it, then that potentially means that you're going to be at a supreme disadvantage, all right? Because, of course, AGI, there's a recursive learning effect in that essentially the computer teaches itself and it creates better and better versions of itself, or at least that's a singularity hypothesis. And if you pair that with robotics, and of course you get a Terminator scenario, fortunately one in which you're in control of the Terminators, right? Now, anyways, this is the map. So this is the radiation map. So according to this map, if just the missile silos are hit, if we're so lucky, then there's a few places, surprisingly, places on the west coast, because of course the jet stream is blowing that way for the most part, places on the West Coast that would be spared the radioactive fallout effects. Now, this is temporary. The aftermath, whatever sort of climatic shifts that occur, there's debate over the extent of nuclear winter. We're going to be interviewing an expert on that particular topic very soon. We've broke it down in the past, and we've said that it's largely overblown, that nuclear winter is not something that the Chinese and the Russians believe in, which is why they think that nuclear war is in fact winnable. This is what the Russians and Chinese really know, not what they pretend to know, okay? But we can see that where I'm located, it's not too bad, but it's not too great either. We're going to get radiation exposure, but it's not going to be nearly as bad as the flyover states. And remember, this is why they put the missile silos here, because it's the least populated. So the least amount of people are going to die if it happens. But the best place to be, according to this map, I hate to say it, Portland, San Francisco, Vancouver. How many of you preppers are going to move there? I think I'm going to ride it out in a bunker. You know, there's ways to deal with this. This is a 2-week problem for the most part, okay? Nuclear fallout, 2-week problem, but it's still good to have, and it's not going to hurt. ThyroSafe, depending on your age, there's different recommendations for that, all right? So, yeah, this is from Scientific American. So, according to this diagram, you can see here, death occurs within days, and then you can go and you can reference in the map. So anybody around here is fucked. Totally fucked. Yeah, totally fucked, lad. And up here, we're not quite hooked like that. The symptoms, nausea, vomiting. So, not quite death. Death from acute radiation syndrome begins to occur in exposed populations. So, yeah. You might want to find where you are on the map, and that might determine what precautions you take. Okay. Let's have a little intermission. A little fun intermission. Sometimes things are just weird. Former Al-Qaeda, bounty on his head of $10 million by the U.S. government. Okay? Zelensky. They go to the same tailor, as you can see, and I'm almost certain that if this guy shaved his beard, I'm pretty good with facial recognition. And I can tell you that these guys look very similar. Very, almost as if they're related. Almost as if they're from the same background or something. I just don't know. I can't quite. We're going to have to do some digging on this Jelani character. I'm telling you guys, CIA, Mossad, it's all like, there's a reason why this guy is not. Why isn't Israel attacking this guy? They could decapitate Hezbollah, okay? Al-Qaeda is supposed to be an enemy of the collective West. And there he is, just prancing around Syria with very little means to defend himself. And I'm certain that Israel knows where this guy is. They could easily take him out. Israel has now gone in, completely demilitarized 500 airstrikes, all of Syria, and this guy's still walking around like this guy's still walking around. Oh boy, if only I told you what I really know. Okay, so this is Lukashenko doing the usual song and dance about, and you can see the concerned look on his people's faces. He seems to be quite assured that, they got the nukes, they're going to get the Orezhnik missiles as well, and, everything's going to work out A-OK. Let's go back and let's talk about this drone situation. Let's talk about what makes sense and what certainly doesn't make sense. Now, there was I believe a man of Chinese origin, a Chinese national, arrested for flying drone over and photographing Vandenberg Space Force Base. This is not the first time this has happened. Of course, we are in a world war. The United States lives in a glass house, and we have incredible amounts of vulnerability across all aspects of our critical infrastructure. It's not Area 51 in all the places that it should be Area 51 levels of security. If somebody wanted to, we would be such an easy target. The fact that we haven't been yet really has me scratching my head. We have to be the luckiest sons of bitches out there. How much time do I got left? 19%. Better make this quick. Now, the Pentagon claims they're aware of the drone situation. Okay, they're aware that it's happening. And Sabrina Singh, let me see if I can find her. So this is what she has to say about it. This is Sabrina Singh. Let's see what she has to say. They're aware of the situation.
Can you rule out that these are American drones or U.S. military drones?
These are not U.S. military drones. Again, this is being investigated by local law enforcement. What our initial...
These drones are thought to be as big as cars, okay? Now, how the hell anybody who makes fun of Russians for not being able to protect that massive country, constantly bombarded with these pinprick Ukrainian drone attacks, making fun of their air defense, we can barely shoot down balloons. You got drones flying around. How hard is it for the Coast Guard or even local law enforcement to send up a helicopter, follow these drones, figure out where they're coming from? Think about that. Just listen to what she says.
Assessment here is that these are not drones or activities coming from a foreign entity or adversary.
How do they know that? They're not military. We don't know where they're coming from, but we're sure that they're not a foreign adversary.
Representative Jeff Van Drew, who is a Republican from New Jersey, was just on the air saying that Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago. That
I mean, and this is just kind of funny. Iranian motherships now. You know, I mean, this screams Starship Troopers. The mothership, the bugs, you know.
Contains these drones, and that mothership is off the coast of the east coast of the United States. Is there any truth to that?
There is not any truth to that. There is no Iranian ship off the coast of the United States, and there's no so-called mothership launching drones towards the United States.
Now, while she might be right about that, we don't know if there isn't some submarine technology. We don't know. This could just be a bunch of college kids playing a prank. It could be, but the amount of sightings of these things is concerning. But I will say this. They could also be setting us up for some kind of false flag, and there might be a reason why she's trying to avoid singling out Iran, knowing that maybe they're going to put the blame on somebody else. Now, we are in a lot of people's backyards right now. We're in the Persian Gulf. We're in Iran's backyard. We are in and around the Black Sea with, you know, the drones. Of course, it hasn't been happening a lot recently, but we're in the Baltic Sea. We're constantly flying recon missions alongside Russia's borders. If Russia was to do that, that's what it would look like. That's exactly what it would look like. That's kind of how they feel every single day when we're flying those missions right along their borders. So we kind of get a taste of it. So imagine the amount of concern that this elicits in the population here. Now imagine that being your everyday reality over there in Russia. We start to understand why they're so on edge. I mean, they're probably on edge because of losing 20 million people not too long ago to a major world war that we're told will never happen again because human nature has changed now. Got to start my car here because I got to get going right away. Yeah, it hasn't changed. In fact, it's going to get a lot worse. It's going to get a lot worse because there's a lot of entitled, spoiled brat little bitches out there. All right, let's see what this guy has to say here. This is some talking head.
The best information that we have available to us to this point suggests that these drones are coming from offshore, that when we try to make contact with them, they become evasive and elusive. From my perspective, if they are American assets, if they're American military, if they're American drones, then I think we owe the American
Sabrina Singh said they aren't U.S. military, but you can't take that to the bank.
people answers or explanations, but if they're not American made, if they're not American drones, then I think we owe the American people action. And if no one else is saying, I'll be the first one to say it. If these are not American assets, then we need to get our assets into the air and blow one of these things out of the sky, pick up the pieces, and figure out what we're dealing with.
Absolutely, I agree with this guy 100%. You're talking about unidentified flying objects in the sky in times of war, flying around, surveilling sensitive sites, and you're not doing anything about it?
5 seconds.
What? Oh, my phone is talking to me now. I gotta turn off my GPS thing is turning on. I hate this stupid thing. It just doesn't make sense. The FBI doesn't know anything. Local law enforcement, the military. I mean, if that doesn't speak to the vulnerability of the United States, I don't know what the hell does. Let's see what this senator has to say here. Being questioned by Mr. Wheeler.
Responsible for that, for that part of activity over that part of New Jersey, including proximity to sensitive sites and areas of concern. So we do not attribute that to an individual or a group yet. We're investigating.
Not an individual, not a group. Think about that. So, is it a species, an alien race? What is it?
Investigating, but I don't have an answer of who's responsible for that, of one or more people that are responsible for those drone flights. But we're actively investigating. What the Bureau has done to aid our state and local partners is what we generally do, enlist the help of the interagency, enlist the help of the public. There's a tip line there, that 1-800-CALL FBI.
It's a fucking drone. You have the most advanced technology in the world. The U.S. has thousands of fighter jets, military bases in the region, and you can't figure out where these drones are coming from? What?
Tips.fbi for information from the public that could help us resolve this. It is concerning.
You're relying on the public?
Public at risk? Is public safety at risk? Are we concerned that there are nefarious intentions that could cause either national security or a public safety incident that would put Americans at risk?
There's nothing that is known that would lead me to say that, but we just don't know, and that's the concerning part.
I just don't get it. I mean, they got to be screwing with us, man. They got to be setting us up for a false flag. Because how could they not? They got so many assets in this region that they should be able to shoot that down or figure out what. I mean, unless all the cops are just busy chasing crackheads or something. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever that they don't know where those drones are coming from. And that this is an issue at all. Like, this should not be an issue at all. I guess we're not nearly as advanced as we claim we are. Today, Iran claimed, I don't have the video here, but it was a high-ranking military personnel, general, something like that, and he was talking about how they're unveiling a new drone platform today and a new type of revolutionary drone. Now, Iran would not be partaking in that level of provocation with the United States, knowing that Trump is in office, especially when they've seen the dissolution of their axis of resistance recently. They would not be engaged in that. They now have to take more of a turtling in approach, I would presume, and possibly start amassing nuclear weapons. I can't see them poking I was going to say the bear, but poking the eagle like that. I just can't see them doing that at this point in time. So it just doesn't make sense, but something's got to be going on. There is definitely a spy game happening in the background. There is a war that we don't see, a war of espionage and information. And I would not be surprised if this is part of that, or this is just psychological warfare on the domestic population to try to get them to conform to whatever sort of agenda the U.S. government has, foreign policy agenda likely. In terms of gold prices are going up once again. The Chinese government has kickstarted their gold purchases once again, so gold is approaching those record highs once again. I told you guys there is nothing to worry about. S&P 500's price-to-book ratio approaches tech bubble peak. Now, there's so many of these indicators and graphs. Pretty much 99% of them indicate that the market is as overvalued as it's ever been in history. Stocks are more expensive relative to the purchasing power of the currency than they've ever been in history. So, yeah, I mean, shit's going to hit the fan. Fartcoin. They could not have foreseen this in the movie Idiocracy. Fartcoin market cap is now at 330 million. And in fact, this is old. This is from yesterday. In the span of a day, Fartcoin's market cap has went up to $550 million. We're living in the end of times. I mean, this is it. It's all done. They found out that the virus affecting mostly children in Congo was in fact malaria. However, they've not ruled out potential other illnesses because people who've returned from that area have returned with these persistent flu-like symptoms. So there might in fact be two illnesses at play here, but most of the people who've now tested for this disease in the Congo is malaria, which is relatively common. It's not a disease X like scenario, okay? So at least for the time being. However, H5N1 is closer to gaining pandemic potential than we originally thought, and it is now essentially in almost like the water supply across the United States and increasingly Canada. According to Seema Lakdawala, researcher at Emory University, Global Center for Health and Security, they say the following: "This feels like the closest to an H5 pandemic that I've ever seen. If H5 is ever going to be a pandemic, it's going to be now," says Seema. H5N1 bird flu has been detected in wastewater samples across the United States, raising concerns about the potential for wider outbreaks. And there's been numerous cases where people have contracted it and they can't isolate the place of origin. Coffee is at record highs as well. So stock up on coffee. 2024 is the warmest year on record since humans began keeping records. We know that this is correlated with human activity. Whether it's significant or not, I guess we'll find out in good time, won't we? We shall find out. This looks like the government site that explains the potassium iodide tender from the government. Google's Willow is getting ready to go Terminator style. It can do an equation which would normally take 10 septillion years in 5 minutes. This mind-boggling number exceeds known timescales in physics and vastly exceeds the age of the universe, of course. Why would you even make that comparison? It lends credence to the notion that quantum computing occurs in many parallel universes in line with the idea that we live in a multiverse. Well, no shit, it's infinite. What's beyond the beyond? What is before? What is what moves the first mover? Anyways, gold 27.46. Yeah. Pelosi, inverse Kramer. Inverse Kramer, if you don't know, everything Kramer says, the opposite happens. And actually, if you bet against what Kramer says, your portfolio would be up almost as much as Nancy Pelosi. So there's a running joke because she, of course, is an insider trader. And but she's winning. She's beating inverse Kramer right now. The Iraqis are digging trenches along the Syrian border, and these are some massive bunkers that were found in Syria loaded with weapons built by most likely the Iranians, the IRGC. Massive bunkers underground in Syria. This is a message from a source close to what's going on in Russia. I believe this is from Telegram. And they're claiming that there's a 75-day amnesty for Russia inside Syria to get their shit out of there. Which is why the fleet has basically abandoned the country. I'm sure there's a lot more news today. I didn't even talk about the Chinese stuff, but I'm running out of time. The Chinese have surrounded Taiwan, the biggest encirclement since 1996. Are they sending a message to Trump? Trump, of course, attempting to play both sides of the fence. I didn't even get to my Polish news today about their build out of their civil defense. Man, there's a ton of news, guys. We'll have to save it for tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you want to pick up ThyroSafe or any other preparedness stuff, get it CanadianPreparedness.com. Right now, there's a Canada Post strike, so we're having to leverage other couriers. And because Canada Post handled millions of parcels around this time, all of that has now been put on the other couriers, so there's going to be delays. You're not going to get it before Christmas if you order it right now, but we're going to try to get it to you as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and